How many of you think that video games have negative effects on our mind? Please raise your hand. Okay, okay. Our next speaker claims that it's not true. He believes that video games improve our personal quality, give us a lot of emotions and experience. And he will try to change our opinion about video games. Please welcome on the stage Nathan Hulsey.
Hello, how are you guys doing? So, I'm going to, you buddy, you were in the wrong spot. I'm going to read you guys a quote really quick. The most irritating feature of play is not its perceptual incoherence, but rather that play taunts us with its inaccessibility. We feel that something is behind it all, but we do not know, or we have forgotten how to see it. Now, that was penned by Robert Fagan, who is a biologist and an animal behaviorist. He pioneered the study of play and eventually play theory back in the 1980s. Now, what he's talking about is the misunderstanding that biologists had about play in the animal species. Play is not fitting very well with the evolutionary motto of that you always have to be working to survive, because play is a random sort of discharge of energy. But I think that this quote also works really well for humans. So my name is Nathan Hulsey, and I am going to be talking to you today about play. And mainly, I'm going to be talking to you about your brain on games. For those of you who might not recognize the cultural reference here, this is from a 1980s anti-drug campaign in the United States, in which the egg is your brain, the frying pan is drugs, and basically the frying egg is your brain on drugs. Now, I cross these out. The egg is still your brain, but the frying pan is a game, and the egg frying happens to be your brain. I don't believe this. Gaming is a hobby that is rapidly growing in the developed world, and I want to broaden this up a little bit, and not just video games, any type of game, really. These are pastimes that have been around for a long time, but recently, with the development of online gaming, we've been seeing gaming sort of come into light with some very, very, very negative characteristics. And what I'm talking about is addiction. I'm talking about depression, violence, social deviancy, and other types of behaviors that one would not want to see in one's society. Well, for example, I guess I could tell a story about China, which is a very large country. There are more gamers in China than there are people in the United States. But the thing is that apparently they are undergoing what they call an epidemic of gaming addiction. So the Chinese government itself has opened up over 60 of these boot camps, right, where children are forcibly brought there by their parents, and they are the Chinese psychiatrists and military trainers that attempt to basically deprogram them, stop them from liking games. And these boot camps are government run, but then there are countless other ones that are not licensed. They use wonderful methods such as corporal punishment, sensory deprivation. They use psychotropic drug therapy to break down resistance. And they also use electroshock therapy, right, which is where they attach electrodes to the head and then engage in negative conditioning. So what we see here, right, is a culture that sort of has rapidly modernized and rapidly attached itself to games. And we also see a rather rapid reaction from the government in fearful response. Now, many of you say, well, these children, right, they have to have been, they have to be extreme cases, right? I mean, these are kids that must be, dying because they're gaming so much. The answer is that if you play more than 3 hours a day on a video game, you are considered an addict in China. So, one, haul me off, and two, basically, right, what we see is an extreme reaction. And you might think, well, this is just a cultural anomaly, but it's not actually true. In the United States now, they're opening up treatment centers. In Europe, they're opening up treatment centers. In Japan and Korea, treatment centers are popping up. Some of them are not as brutal, right, as what's going on, but they still involve treatment with psychotropic drugs, sensory deprivation, and negative conditioning, right, to stop people from wanting to play is really what they're trying to do. It's really interesting because the social research on gaming that I'm privy to, and I study media, but I'm also a ludologist. That means I study play, right? Basically, what we see is that gaming up to 24 hours per week is very beneficial for you. It relieves stress. It improves memory. It improves eye-hand coordination. And for those of us in the crowd who are heading towards the hill or over it, if you're over 40, right, it actually lessens your chance to get dementia by quite a bit, really. Now, the interesting thing about that is that this doesn't hold up. When you hit 40 hours a week, all benefits disappear, and you begin to see negative effects. But the interesting about this thing is that this is the same as research that's been done with work. If you work over 40 hours a week, you begin to suffer negative health benefits. You become mentally unstable. You can suffer from depression, irritability, and generally your quality of life decreases. So my question is the disconnect between gaming and beneficial. When we think about gaming 40 hours per week, you are doing something really horrible. But if you're working over 40 hours per week, you're a hard worker, and it's to be commended because you are, of course, productive member of society. Now, gaming, right, instead gets called, I believe by one Chinese official, online heroin, which will fry your brains. So, I'm here to tell you that games do not fry your brains. They don't. Please consider games and gaming as beneficial activities, right? As possibilities for pro-social initiatives and as a possibility for your own personal improvement. Games involve play, which is really, really important. So play is actually our learning instinct. What we do know and what Fagan and other biologists figured out after intensely studying animal play is that this isn't just some random fire-off of energy, right? Play is literally the learning instinct at work, okay? When you're playing, you are active, you are actively creating, and you are basically learning. So from play, interestingly enough, and we'll get to this a little more later, but most anthropologists and sociologists believe that almost all of human culture has come from this learning seed, right? This want or desire to explore, this want or desire to do things. And so when we look at the history of humanity, we see on one side, right, art and music, right? What do? You play your instruments, you do these types of things. And then if we look at music, it crosses over into math and logic and these other types of things. Before we had writing, we had games. We had dice, right? We had knuckle bones, which are found in caves. And they found an old bone in South Africa with hash marks in it. At first, they thought they were taking inventory, right? But it turns out that they also found these knuckle bones nearby that turned out they were shooting dice, right? And this is old stuff. So basically, what we see is the beginning of human culture, right, and play are sort of intersecting with one another. We need to keep this in mind. Two, players obtain valuable skill sets that are directed and cultivated by games. So basically, I'll talk about this a little more as well, but when you're engaging in a game, you are engaging your intelligence, right? You are engaging your learning ability. You are basically lighting up your brain on many, many different levels. And then finally, and this is the most important part, is that games are a really flexible medium, right? They're really based off of design. A video game does not have to be a crazy first-person shooter. It doesn't have to be a long, involved, role-playing game or something like that. Basically, we can actually design games to directly intervene in social issues, to motivate and encourage people to make better decisions with their life, and also to just direct players' collective creativity into science, social improvements, and learning. And you may think, well, why isn't that happening? One of the things that we'll actually cover is that it is at a massive rate and a really quick pace. So look, gameplay, mind-body benefits are really, really important. So Dr. Stuart Brown is a neurosurgeon, well, not a neurosurgeon, excuse me, a neurologist, they're different. And basically, he is also the head of the National Institute for Play. He states that play is a survival drive, right? It's a survival drive that really allows us as a species and as an individual to adopt to change, right? To change ourselves rapidly when new situations come up. And so there's a great quote from Darwin, right, that change is probably one of the most important things that you can come up with for survival. Well, when you are playing games, and not just one type, but of many types, you are literally changing yourself on a rapid basis, much more quickly than, say, regular life, where you might change every once in a while. Video games really require you to react. But this is the interesting thing that he says. And this is based on MRIs and things like that of people that we've done, or but he, the National Institute for Play, has done. Basically, he says that the opposite of play isn't work, as we might think. It's actually depression, all right? So basically, if you are not playing, you are going to be a very sad person. The definition of play is really difficult, and it's because there's so many different types. We've tried to categorize them, but it's almost impossible. The one thing that I know is that oftentimes play is called very unimportant, and you're discouraged from doing it, especially when you get older. But actually, it is extremely important. So one of the things about play that we need to remember is that play and intelligence are synonymous with one another. Only intelligent animals play. And the more intelligent they are, the more they play. The more they play, the more likely they are to pick up things like tool building, for instance, crows, right? Very, very playful species. Corvids, they also can build tools and solve problems. Bonobos, another very playful species that has now learned language. And from generation to generation in Atlanta now, there are speaking bonobos that speak Yerkish, right, which is a sign language, a pictorial language. This is really important. Also, play drives these kind of cross-species relationships. So sure, we gave dogs food, but the other thing we gave them was companionship and pleasure, which led them to stick with us, right? Cats, not so much, but dogs for sure. But there are plenty of other cross-species things that are around. So one example, right, is the play bow. If you'll ever see dogs play with each other, they'll bow to each other first, and then they'll start frisking around. That's almost a universal signal, right? And there's a famous video, which I couldn't get, but it is of a dog bowing to a polar bear. They run across each other. It's a husky. The polar bear looks at the dog does the play bow, and sort of like, hey, buddy. Normally these two would be adversaries, but the polar bear decided, okay. So he bowed, and they just run around in the snow with each other, right? And this is cross-species communication. So it's really, really important. And then finally, for humans, right, play in our advanced social brains that have language ability, syntax, grammar, it actually helps us to form collective knowledge, social bonds, and rituals. And so it's important to note that many anthropologists, I could name off a whole bunch of them, but y'all aren't anthropology majors, so it doesn't matter. Sociologists as well, could name off a lot of those, believe that the play instinct really holds the seed for all of our human culture and society, right? And if we remember to go back, that play, right, is this learning. It's this desire to be creative. It's this desire to learn. It's this desire to find new patterns, right? Where we love looking at patterns. We like rearranging things. And that's part of the play instinct. Denying that would be very sad indeed. So here's a crow that's learned how to ski.
What? В горке катается. Она нас, наверное, дразнит. Балует. Интересно, в какой стороне они сейчас? Тут. Нет. Она вообще не едет.
Doesn't work, you gotta have snow.
Здря.
All right. So I just want you guys to realize, right, that play is this universal thing. It's not something that humans do, and it's something that animals do. And that was not a juvenile crow, right? That was a fully adult crow doing this. They don't stop playing, and no crow ever comes to another crow and says, dude, you need to stop. You're too old for this, right? You are too old to do this. And it's sad in a way. Jane McGonigal, who is a play theorist and also a game designer, states that we've been playing games since humanity had civilization. There's something primal about our desire and our ability to play games. It's so deep-seated that it can bypass latter-day cultural norms and biases. So if we think about cross-species communication in animals, play also allows humans to cross cultures and borders and play with one another. So for instance, I didn't skip a beat coming over here even though I'm playing with Russians, right, on my video game servers. Doesn't matter. The language is universal. The language of sportsmanship, the language and the rules, right? I don't need to have to speak to them to be able to play. And my Russian is terrible. So also, modern psychological research says that play is a really important element for quality of life. So Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, say that 3 times fast, who is a sort of the founder of positive psychology, really seated play in the middle of these really important processes like learning, creativity, well-being, and one of the most important ones is flow, which is this very important state of mind where you're completely and utterly absorbed with what you're doing, to the point where you might go in and play with something, playing an instrument, playing a video game, right, building something. These are all playful activities, right? You might come 2-4 hours later and it only felt like 5 minutes, and instead of being tired, you're refreshed, right? This is flow states, right, are what actually fights depression, right? They are a very unique mindset, and they really only come from these playful situations where you're pursuing mastery for the sake of mastery. It's important to note also that play, right, is harnessed and directed by games. Games are the rule systems that make play go. They bring order to play, right? Games are assumed to be a waste of time, but it's interesting that players accrue a lot of knowledge and skills when they're doing this. For instance, Harvard Business School in the 90s did a ton of studies on gamers, and what they expected, right, was that they would be really bad employees. It turns out that gamers were better decision makers, right, in a crisis. It turns out that they were better leaders. It turns out that they understood teamwork better. It turns out that because of playing games, they understood resource management better than many other people who didn't. They understood about taking risks, and they were willing to take smart ones. Basically, the Harvard Business Review calls it the gamer disposition, all right? And this is what they say. Gamers are employees who are flexible, resourceful, improvisational, eager for a quest, believers in meritocracy, and foes of bureaucracy. If your organization is receptive to these traits, and it should be, look for gamers in the disposition they will bring you, i.e. actively seek them out. They are a boon to your organization. And you know what? Benefits to gaming can be extended well beyond coincidentals. By engineering pro-social games, we can harness the gamer disposition to solve or improve a number of different problems, right? So, game design engages, right, or could engage thousands, millions of people in making positive decisions and goals, aiding the scientific process, and improving local and national political situations. Jane McGonigal, once again, our game designer, resident game designer, I suppose, and play theorist, said that there's no problem that doesn't have some underlying need for more optimism, stamina, resilience, and collaboration. And games are, I believe, the best platform we have for providing that. And we are moving towards a new form of collective intelligence. So it might seem a little far-fetched. And 2, many of you might be like, well, where are all these games that are solving problems? Well, I have a few up here right now. First is scientific play. These are games that scientists created in order to access the enormous collective potential of the human mind, right? The first one up here is Fold It, which is a protein folding game. It's a puzzle game, right? The scientists needed to fold a lot of different random proteins to figure out which ones did which. They needed access to a supercomputer, and they couldn't afford it. So one guy had the bright idea that, well, if even like 5,000 or 6,000 people play this game, even for a little while, we'll have the processing power of the world's fastest supercomputer. Turns out 20,000, 30,000 people were playing the game. They did more protein folds within a couple of days than a supercomputer could have done in weeks. That's human collective intelligence, right? Second one is Ingress, which is a game that Google has released. And Google has released this game for a very specific reason. The game involves, right, a cell phone and a map that's overlaid with your actual city, and people are on teams and you're running around trying to take certain things. It's kind of like a massive game of capture the flag. What Google is attempting to solve is the traveling salesman problem. which is an extremely difficult computational problem in which you want somebody to take the shortest routes through a series of cities, not have to go back or backtrack, right? And he takes the full thing and returns back to where he is in the first thing. It turns out that there's a lot of different ways that you can do it. And the traveling salesman problem is a constant issue for directing and predicting pedestrian traffic movements. Google has its driving thing, right? Google wants to also be your guide for walking. And a lot of times Google's walking software is terrible. If you've ever tried it, like when you're walking and trying to find your way, it's not very good. They're desperately trying to fix that, and they're doing it by watching the travel movements of the hundreds of thousands of Ingress players all over the world. And then finally, there's Eterna, or ETE-RNA. The last thing is RNA, and what this is similar to Foldit. A lab, once again, needs a variety of different RNA combinations. What they do is they literally send people into this game. Once again, they could do it with a supercomputer, but why? When people will do it for free. So basically, they send people in after a short training period, right? You enter into the lab phase, and that is where you're competing with others to make the most clever and smart RNA combinations that you can make. If you win, then your RNA gets synthesized in the lab and you get a certificate, all right? So basically, people are getting rewarded for constantly recombining and combining RNA. Next is pro-social play. So first is a Khan Academy. Who here's heard of Khan Academy, right? Anybody ever notice that it's slightly game-like? You get points, you get badges, you get things like that. People are able to freely talk with one another. You're able to take courses for free. Khan Academy is very famous for being one of the first gamified online education systems. And gamified means it's not quite a full game, but it takes game mechanics to motivate people to do things, right? And Khan Academy really has revolutionized the idea of free education, and free education that is fun and accessible for everybody. The second one, right, is Advanced Democratic Ideals. This is a game called Nosy, K-N-O-Y-S-Y, right? Doesn't really matter how it's spelled. But what it's done is it's a new way to host civic meetings. Nosy actually is a game that people play in groups, and it automatically generates all of the issues that are going to be covered in the meeting, all of the people's opinions, right, who have been this, and it also, people have already come to compromises before they come to the table by playing Nosy. Nosy encourages compromise. It encourages problem solving within small groups. So this is a small group, a small community attempting to understand what they're going to do with their water supply in the massive drought that's going on in California right now. Everything is dying, and people aren't able to water their lawns or their kids. You got to water your kids; they'll die too. So right, this is them trying to figure out what they're going to do. And then finally, you can promote responsible behavior. This is Recycle Bank, and once again, like Khan Academy, it is a large collection of games and gaming sort of mechanics lumped into a recycling program that encourages people to make really good decisions, drop off their recycling, and if you can prove that you did that by uploading receipts and things like that for your recycling, then you can actually get prizes, right, shipped right to your door. And so this actually won a couple of awards for being a really good idea. It's worked for many, many years, and it's backed by Al Gore. So these are just some of the things, too. There are so many, I can't even list them all, of where people are now beginning to understand that play is the most important human power source we have. It doesn't involve hurting somebody. It doesn't involve making them do something. It involves inviting them, right, to come and to play and to create and to explore. So, conclusion, right? Play is the highest form of research. If you can't trust Uncle Albert, right, about play, then who are you going to trust? Speaking of interspecies communication, looks like dogs made a friend. So I want you guys to leave here and not listen to somebody when they tell you that you're too old, and you tell you that it's a waste of time. Because a life that's not well played is a very, very boring life indeed. So I'm not telling you that you should sit in front of a computer for 30 hours a week or anything like that. What I'm telling you is that understand that basically if you do not balance your life and if you do not explore not only possibilities with other people but with yourself as well, then you are not going to have a whole lot of fun. And that seems to be kind of something you'd want to do before you kick the bucket, right? Before you die. So just remember, whoever tells you to stop, your parents, anybody else, you can tell them, Uncle Albert Albert Einstein told me not to. I'm not going to. All right, thanks.